I found the will by accident, hidden in an old email. My name was on it. I was supposed to be the executor of my father's estate, but my mom and sister, they'd buried it, spent the money, lied to my face for 3 whole years, and I never saw it coming. Hi, I'm Anna Whitmore, and this is the story of how I took the people I trusted most to court. What would you do if your own family betrayed you like that? Would you fight back or walk away? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story. They always said I was too serious. Maybe that's why I stayed quiet for 3 whole years. It wasn't that I didn't feel or that I didn't care. I just never saw the point in showing it. I was never the one to cry, never the one to yell. I simply stayed silent, letting time pass me by. The world had a way of carrying on with or without my participation, and I'd learned to live with that. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I clicked through a few emails. The numbers on the spreadsheet in front of me didn't make sense at first, but I'd learned to trust my eyes. I'd worked with numbers long enough to know when something was wrong. The $3,200 withdrawal from a joint account, an account I never recalled approving, caught my attention. I stared at it for a moment, leaning in closer, trying to piece together the strange feeling in my chest. I should have called, I knew that. But instead, I just clicked through to the next task. Another email came through, another routine alert. Nothing to be concerned about, right? But then there was the second email coming from a no-reply address. The subject line read, "Dad's will, private copy." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. For a brief moment, everything went still. Dad's will? I'd never seen a copy. Not once in my life had I been involved in any conversation about it. Yet here it was, floating in my inbox like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I clicked it open, my hands trembling as the document loaded. It was a PDF marked with the word confidential. As I scrolled down, my eyes landed on the name Anna Whitmore, listed as the primary executor of my father's estate. I sat back in my chair, my breath shallow. My heart beat harder, faster. This wasn't possible. My mind raced through the years, through the countless times I'd ask my mother about the will, about what would happen when he was gone. "Don't worry about it, sweetie," she'd always say, her voice light, dismissive, never once offering any clarity. She had always kept the important things to herself, just like she did everything else. But why had I never thought to question it before? Why hadn't I seen the signs? As I sat there staring at the screen, the weight of the silence that had hung over me for years pressed down on me harder than ever. I could feel the tightness in my chest, the disbelief. My mind wanted to scream, but I didn't let myself. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of my laptop and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I opened the document again, looking at it more closely. The will predated my father's death by 2 weeks. 2 weeks! That meant he had known. He had known that time was running out. The sudden ache in my chest was unbearable. Why didn't I know about this? Why hadn't anyone told me? I called my mother. Her voice was chipper on the other end, as if nothing in the world could bother her. "Anna, darling, are you calling about the wellness retreat I was telling you about last week?" She didn't even wait for my response before continuing, "It's going to be so wonderful. You should really consider it. Such a great opportunity for you. Everyone's going to love it." I gripped the phone tighter. "Mom, I found something. The will. The one Dad left behind. I didn't know about it." "Ah, yes, the will." She sounded a little distracted now, as though she had to remember what she was talking about. "It's all sorted, sweetie. Don't worry about it. We're handling everything fine." "Mom, this doesn't make sense," I replied, my voice trembling despite my efforts to remain calm. "I don't know anything about it. Why wasn't I involved in any of the decisions? Why is this just coming up now?" She let out a sigh, soft and almost bored. "Anna, please, don't be dramatic. It's all taken care of. We've had some family expenses recently. You know how things are." "Family expenses?" I echoed, struggling to make sense of the words. "Mom, I'm talking about the will. I was listed as the executor, and I didn't even know this document existed." There was silence on the other end of the line, a long, almost uncomfortable pause. Finally, she spoke again, more softly now. "Don't worry about it, sweetie. You know how these things are. We have everything under control." But we didn't. We never had. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I didn't know what else to say. What could I say? The truth was staring me in the face, but I was too stunned to react. How could she have hidden something like this from me? The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to focus on work, but every time I glanced at the document, my mind would wander. How long had my father known? How long had my mother kept me in the dark? My father had always been quiet, soft-spoken, reserved. But this was something different. This was a betrayal. As I sat there, staring at the blank screen of my laptop, my mind raced. I needed answers, but I wasn't sure where to start. What else didn't I know? The weight of the silence in my life had always been a part of me, a part of how I coped, but now it was louder than ever. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I stared at the screen for a moment longer, the cup of cold coffee in my hand now forgotten. I was done being silent. Grief isn't just crying at funerals. Sometimes it's watching your family spend money that isn't theirs. It's seeing them flaunt luxuries they didn't earn and knowing the money used to fund their habits was once yours. It's the slow suffocation of realizing that the very people you trusted are now drowning you in their deceit. I hadn't planned on digging into my father's affairs. In fact, I hadn't planned on confronting my mother about it at all. But the more I thought about the will, about what my mother had said, and about the life my sister and I had led in silence, the more the weight of the secret pressed down on me. This wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. I needed answers. And so I made an appointment with Mr. Kaplan, the family lawyer. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, the kind of place where people came to hide behind laptops and newspapers, where conversations were held in hushed tones, the clinking of coffee cups and soft jazz music filling the air. It was a contrast to what I was about to uncover. Mr. Kaplan's law office was just as quiet, an old building filled with leather-bound books and ticking clocks. I couldn't help but feel the weight of the past in those walls, the walls that had witnessed countless family secrets unfold. Mr. Kaplan greeted me with a soft smile. He was in his late 70s, his movements slow but deliberate. He had been Robert Whitmore's lawyer for over 30 years, a loyal man who had always stood by our family. But today, I saw something different in his eyes. Maybe it was the years of service finally catching up with him, or maybe it was just that I was seeing things differently, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. I handed him the will draft, the one marked confidential, the one I had found in my email that morning. He took it from me, his hands careful as he unfolded it. He read through the document quickly, his brow furrowing as he reached the end. "I've seen this before," he said, almost to himself. "You have?" I asked, the confusion creeping into my voice. He looked up, his glasses perched low on his nose. "Yes, Robert discussed this will with me several months before his death. I remember it clearly. He wanted you to be the executor, Anna. He wanted to make sure you were involved." My heart sank. The words stung more than I had expected. My father had talked about it. He had made arrangements, and yet here I was, clueless. I stared at Mr. Kaplan, searching his face for any hint of guilt or shame. "Did you send a copy to my mother?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "I did," Mr. Kaplan replied, his voice steady. "I sent it to her right after Robert passed away, a certified copy, but it was never filed. I'm afraid it's all been swept under the rug." The words hit me like a cold wave. A copy of the will had been sent to Linda, but she had never acted on it. She had kept it hidden. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I swallowed it down. I had to stay focused. I had to know the truth. "Do you have access to the public probate records?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. Mr. Kaplan nodded. "Of course. I can pull those up for you. But I can tell you right now, there's no record of the will being filed." I nodded, feeling my stomach churn. It made sense. No will had been filed, no official record, just a trail of paper and lies. This was worse than I had imagined. That evening, I found myself sitting in my mother's kitchen, a quiet dinner that was far too normal for what was happening inside my head. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, and Chloe was perched at the kitchen island, completely absorbed in her phone. She was live streaming her outfit again. #OOTD, #SoftLife. As always, the hashtags were more important than the family dinner happening around her. "Did Dad ever talk to you about an official executor?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though my insides were anything but. Linda, who had been stirring a pot on the stove, didn't look up. She just shrugged. "You worry too much, Anna. It's all handled. You know how your father was. Always so methodical. Everything was in place. Don't worry about it." Her words were like a dull knife to the chest. I felt the anger rising again, but I kept it down. I took a slow breath and tried again. "Mom, this isn't just about the will. It's about the way things were handled. Why was I kept in the dark? Why wasn't I included?" Linda finally glanced up at me, but there was no apology in her eyes, just the same indifference I had grown so accustomed to. "Because you're the serious one, Anna. You never made a fuss. Your father and I thought you'd handle it all in your own time." I could feel the ache in my chest, the sharpness of betrayal cutting deeper with every word. I wanted to scream, but instead I just nodded. I had to leave. I had to get out of there before I said something I would regret. But as I made my way to the door, something caught my eye. On the counter, right next to the fruit bowl, was a Louis Vuitton tote. New. Too new. I walked over to it, my heart racing. I recognized the bag immediately. It was the same one that had been charged to the estate fund in the transaction I'd seen earlier that day. I turned and looked at Linda, who was now on her phone. Chloe, too, was still glued to her screen. The bag didn't matter to them, but it mattered to me. It was just another symbol of the lies they'd been feeding me, another symbol of everything that had been kept from me. I left the house in a hurry, my mind racing. I had to know more. That evening I walked back to my condo, my feet moving faster than my mind. I was almost at my door when I stopped. There was a sense of urgency in my steps. Something was pulling me toward the mailbox. I opened it, and there, resting on top of a few bills and a magazine subscription, was an envelope. No return address, but the name on it sent a shiver down my spine. It was addressed to Robert Whitmore, deceased. I ripped it open, my hands shaking. Inside, there was another document, the same kind of PDF I had found earlier, only this one had been postmarked 3 years ago. 3 years. You expect betrayal to come with a scream, but sometimes it comes in a monogrammed bag and a receipt you never signed. It doesn't yell or shout. Instead, it quietly slides across the counter, tucked in with the shiny trappings of privilege, hidden behind polite smiles. It's more dangerous that way, more insidious, and you don't even realize you're drowning until you're already under. I hadn't wanted to come back here, not to this house filled with memories of better days, but something inside me, something sharp, something raw, drove me to return. It was one thing to discover the secrets they'd been keeping from me. It was another to understand the depth of the betrayal, and today I was going to find that depth. The upstairs bedroom was just as I remembered it. The same soft pastel colors on the walls, the faint smell of lavender still clinging to the curtains. I used to love this room. I used to feel safe here, but now it felt colder, darker. The walls had witnessed too many years of silence, and I wasn't sure how much longer they could hold the secrets that had been buried within them. I sat on the bed, my fingers tracing the edges of the old wooden jewelry box that had belonged to my mother. It had always been a symbol of wealth and tradition, a family heirloom passed down through generations. But today, it felt like nothing more than a relic of the past. I wasn't sure why I was drawn to it, but something told me I needed to open it. Underneath, there was a small brass key, taped carefully to the underside, almost as if it were trying to hide in plain sight. I stared at it for a moment before slipping it into my pocket. The key was heavy with the promise of something I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but I had come this far. I wasn't turning back now. I made my way downstairs to my father's desk. It had always been a place of order, neatness. His leather-bound notebooks, the steady ticking of his antique clock, the smell of freshly inked pens. It was his space, a world I never truly understood, but one I respected. Until now. Now, it felt like a tomb, a place where secrets had been buried. I unlocked the drawer with the brass key, the metal clicking against the lock as it gave way. Inside, I found a stack of papers, neatly tied with a ribbon. My fingers trembled as I pulled them out, the weight of the documents heavier than I had expected. There were letters from my father, handwritten drafts of the will he had never finalized, and a ledger, a detailed list of what he had called estate gifts, gifts that my mother had taken without hesitation, without my knowledge. I could feel the heat rising in my chest as I flipped through the pages. Linda had been keeping track of everything from expensive vacations to luxury goods, all paid for with money that wasn't hers, money from the estate, my father's legacy, stripped away and used to maintain a lifestyle that none of us had earned. But it wasn't just the money that stung, it was the betrayal. The emotional weight of knowing my mother had been quietly siphoning off funds, keeping me in the dark, all the while pretending to be the loving, caring mother she always had been. This wasn't just financial, it was personal. I needed answers. That night, I logged into my father's old email account. I hadn't expected it to still be active, but it was. It was as though his digital life had been frozen, stuck in time. I scrolled through the inbox, and there they were. Emails from Mr. Kaplan, unanswered. They were dated from just days before my father passed away, discussions about the will, instructions to finalize everything. But they had never been addressed, never responded to. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of the discovery sinking in. My father had left explicit instructions, and yet here I was standing in the ruins of the aftermath, alone and abandoned by those who should have been my closest allies. I had known it all along, hadn't I? There was no family loyalty, no love, only manipulation, only control. It was time to confront them. I walked into the living room where Linda and Chloe were sprawled out on the couch. Chloe was glued to her phone again, a live stream of some brunch she was attending. She barely acknowledged my presence. Linda was flipping through a magazine, her head tilted back, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing in the room. I stood in front of them, holding the papers in my hand. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't hold back the truth anymore. "Why didn't you file the will?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with the weight of the question. Linda looked up, her eyes widening, but there was no guilt there, just annoyance. "We were protecting the family image," she replied quickly, as if the words were rehearsed. "You already have a good life, Anna. You didn't need to be involved in all of this." Chloe looked up briefly, her eyes flicking from her phone to me. "You're just mad that you can't control everything anymore," she said with a sneer, going back to her live stream. The words hit me like a slap. But I didn't react, I didn't yell, I didn't even flinch. I had learned over the years that rage wasn't going to get me anywhere with them. But this was different. This wasn't just anger, this was something deeper. I said nothing. Instead, I calmly gathered the papers and placed them into my tote bag. I took one last look at my mother, who was already back to her magazine, and Chloe, who was now pretending to be busy with her phone. It was like they didn't even notice the world was crumbling around them. On my way out, I paused at the front door. I turned to face them, my voice low but unwavering. "I hope you both packed light, because what's coming next won't be a vacation." With that, I left. I stepped into the cool evening air, the weight of the bag in my hand somehow grounding me. I knew what I had to do now. I walked straight to my car, my mind racing, but all I could think about was the next step. The next move in this game I had just begun to play. I had been silent for too long. It was time to make my move. As I drove, I reached for my phone and dialed Mr. Kaplan's number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm but curious. "Mr. Kaplan," I said, my voice steady. "Let's begin." They were boarding a flight to Hawaii. I was about to take away everything they thought they owned. The beach resort, the expensive dinners, the designer bags. They had built their lives on illusions, and I was ready to shatter them. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and methodical. My father's voice echoed in my mind, as clear now as it had been in life. He had always believed in doing things the right way, no matter how slow the process was. He had always believed in fairness, even when others didn't. And right now, as I sat in my car on the way to the airport, I knew I was about to prove him right. I had spent the last few weeks gathering evidence, organizing legal paperwork, and making sure that every step I took was precise. There would be no mistakes, no emotional outbursts, just cold, calculated steps toward justice. Mr. Kaplan had confirmed everything I needed to know. The estate's assets had been frozen, including all joint accounts linked to Linda and Chloe. The family's life of luxury, everything they thought they could get away with, was about to come crashing down. I glanced out the window of my car as we neared the airport. Santa Barbara's coastline was as beautiful as ever, the sun sparkling on the ocean like a postcard. But today, the image of paradise felt hollow. My mother and sister were about to learn the hard way that no one was above the law, no matter how much money they had. No one was untouchable. I arrived at the beachfront resort just as Linda and Chloe were stepping out of the taxi, their laughter and excitement filling the air. Chloe had already pulled out her phone, pointing it at the resort entrance and filming herself as if she were some kind of influencer on a luxury getaway. The reality of their lives, carefree, spending without limits, was about to come to an end. I had no sympathy. I walked straight to the lobby, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The hotel was bustling with guests checking in, the sound of voices and the clinking of luggage carts filling the space. Expensive furniture lined the lobby, a chandelier hung from the ceiling, and the view of the California coast outside was breathtaking. But none of it mattered. This place, this luxury was built on lies, and I was about to take it all away. As Linda and Chloe approached the check-in desk, I watched closely. Linda smiled at the receptionist, her platinum card already in hand, ready to claim her spot in paradise. But the receptionist hesitated, typing something into the computer. Her face shifted slightly. She scanned the card again. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it seems there's an issue with your card," the receptionist said, her voice polite but firm. Linda raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? It's a platinum card. There must be some mistake." The receptionist offered a tight smile. "I'm afraid I'll have to try another one, ma'am." Linda didn't seem fazed, but I could see the flicker of confusion in her eyes. She quickly pulled out another card and handed it over. The transaction went through, but there was no doubt in my mind that Linda was already starting to feel the weight of the situation. The money, the accounts, the power, they were slipping away, one card at a time. Just as they were about to step away from the counter, the front doors opened. Officer Blake entered, his uniform sharp and his posture unwavering. The room seemed quiet in response to his presence. He walked straight toward Linda and Chloe, his eyes focused and calm, as though he knew exactly what he was about to do. "Ma'am, Miss Whitmore," Officer Blake called, his voice clear and professional. Linda turned toward him, confusion and annoyance crossing her face. "What is it?" she asked, her tone dismissive, as if she were used to being in control of every situation. "Can't you see we're on vacation?" "I'm afraid you'll have to come with me," Officer Blake said, his voice unwavering. Linda's expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "What's this about? I haven't done anything wrong." "On the contrary," Officer Blake replied calmly, "you are being arrested for fraud and identity theft in connection with the will of Robert Whitmore." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. A few hotel guests who had been lingering nearby pulled out their phones, eager to capture the spectacle. I didn't need to see their faces to know what they were thinking. Linda's carefully crafted world of luxury was falling apart in real time. "I don't know what you're talking about," Linda snapped, her voice rising now. She grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling her back toward the elevator, but the officer didn't move. He simply stood his ground, waiting for the inevitable. Chloe, still glued to her phone, glanced up from her screen, clearly irritated. "Are you serious?" she asked, her tone mocking. "What is this, a joke? You're really going to do this now?" Officer Blake's expression didn't change. He remained calm, as though he'd done this 1,000 times before. "I have a warrant for your arrest, Miss Whitmore. For both of you." Linda and Chloe exchanged a glance, and for the first time I saw a flicker of panic in Linda's eyes. She tried to maintain her composure, but it was slipping away fast. "This isn't how it's supposed to be," she murmured, her voice breaking for a moment. The hotel staff watched, unsure of how to react, but the tension in the room was palpable. The scene was unfolding like something out of a bad movie, except it was real. And this time, there would be no happy ending for my mother and sister. Linda and Chloe were escorted out of the lobby, their heads held high, but their faces betraying the fear they were trying so hard to hide. Guests murmured to each other, phones in hand, capturing every moment. I stood in the background, silent but resolute. I had done what needed to be done. The paperwork was in motion, the legal proceedings were set. They would be held accountable, and the truth would come to light. As I left the lobby, I felt the weight of everything shift inside me. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. The quiet kind, the methodical kind. I checked my phone as I stepped outside into the bright Californian sunshine. A message from Mr. Kaplan popped up. "The next step is court. It's happening faster than we thought." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already made my decision. There was no turning back now. I thought I'd feel something when they were dragged into court, but what I felt was nothing. I thought maybe there'd be anger, maybe even relief, but there was only a hollow emptiness, a strange detachment from the gravity of what was happening. It wasn't the justice I had imagined, nor the confrontation I had hoped for. It was just a reckoning. And it was quiet, like the final echo of a conversation you never wanted to have in the first place. Even if you're my family, that doesn't mean you get to break the rules. My father had said that a long time ago. I always took it to heart, but today, hearing those words in my mind felt like they were meant for this moment. This very court case, where the very people who should have known better had betrayed the most sacred trust: family. The Santa Barbara County Courthouse was everything you'd expect: cold, formal, and suffocating in its air of neutrality. A marble and wood facade, towering windows that let in too much light, and walls that had witnessed countless trials over the years. Today, it was our turn. My turn, really. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really present here. My body was seated in the witness chair, but my mind kept drifting, unable to fully connect with the proceedings. It was like watching someone else's life unfold, a life that had nothing to do with me. Except it did. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating in its silence. I wore a black suit, a sharp contrast to the warm California sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows. I felt oddly out of place, like I was wearing a suit that didn't belong to me. But it was what I had to wear. It was the armor I needed to face the two people who had betrayed me the most. Linda sat at the defendant's table, her posture stiff, her eyes wide with defiance. I could see the cracks in her carefully crafted facade, the way her hand trembled ever so slightly as it rested on the table. She was trying to hold it together, to maintain some semblance of control. But I knew that her world was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Chloe sat beside her, her eyes darting nervously between her phone and the proceedings. She was pretending to keep up with the trial, but I knew she was more concerned with how it was being broadcasted online than with what was happening in real life. Her phone screen was a lifeline, a way to maintain the illusion of control in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. But the cameras weren't just on her now. They were on all of us, and there was no escaping the truth. Mr. Kaplan sat across from me, his calm demeanor a steadying force. He had been more than just a lawyer throughout this ordeal. He had been my anchor, my guide through the chaos. And now, he was doing what he did best, presenting the truth, one painstakingly organized piece at a time. The judge, Judge Lyman, was a middle-aged man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He'd been following the case closely, and I could tell he had already made up his mind. He was fair, but his empathy didn't seem to extend to Linda and Chloe. He understood, just as I did, that there was a difference between grief and greed. And that difference had made all the difference in the world. I took the stand, my hands gripping the edges of the podium to steady myself. It wasn't the first time I'd spoken in court. I had testified in smaller cases during my career as a financial analyst, but this felt different. This was personal. This wasn't just about numbers. This was about my family, the family that had broken apart because of lies and deceit. "I'm Anna Whitmore," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I'm the daughter of Robert Whitmore, and I'm here today to speak on behalf of his final wishes." I could feel their eyes on me, my mother's, my sister's, but I couldn't look at them. I couldn't bear to see the deflection, the lies in their eyes. Instead, I turned my gaze to the judge. "My father's last will and testament clearly stated that I was to be the executor of his estate," I continued. "But my mother, Linda Whitmore, and my sister, Chloe Whitmore, suppressed the will. They used his estate for their own personal gain, all while claiming to honor his wishes." I could feel the eyes of the room shift, the murmurs running through the crowd. This was it, the moment the truth was laid bare. Mr. Kaplan stood, his presence calm and professional as ever. He presented the evidence one by one: bank records, fraudulent credit card charges, the forged signatures. There was no denying it. The proof was irrefutable. The funds Linda and Chloe had used for their vacations, for their designer bags and extravagant lifestyle, had been siphoned from my father's estate. My father's hard-earned legacy was being used as their personal piggy bank. Linda's lawyer tried to defend her, of course. "My client has been under immense emotional distress. She lost her husband, and in her grief, she made mistakes. She didn't understand the full scope of her actions." The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman with a clear, steady voice, stood up to counter. "Emotional distress does not absolve a person of their actions. These were premeditated acts, carried out over the span of several years. Linda Whitmore knew exactly what she was doing." Then came Chloe's turn. She sat nervously in her seat, her phone resting on the table in front of her. "I wasn't involved in any of this," she said, her voice shaking. "My mom told me what to do. She made me spend the money. I didn't know it was wrong." But her Instagram history told a different story. Mr. Kaplan had found it all: screenshots of her posts, pictures of the designer bags, the luxury resorts. It was clear. She wasn't some naive bystander. She had been complicit in the whole thing. The room grew quiet as the jury deliberated. When they returned, the verdict was delivered swiftly. "Linda Whitmore," the judge said, his voice firm, "you are sentenced to 4 years in prison and are required to repay $157,000 in restitution." Chloe's sentence was less severe, but still significant. "Chloe Whitmore, you are sentenced to 2 years of probation and are required to repay $85,000 in restitution." The room held its breath as Linda's lawyer stood, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity, but the damage had already been done. The punishment had been decided. Justice had been served. I couldn't feel triumphant. I couldn't feel anything. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My family was broken, and no amount of justice could fix it. That evening, as I sat in my car outside the courthouse, my phone buzzed. A new message from Mr. Kaplan. I opened it, reading the words that would change everything. The next step is court. It's happening faster than we thought. I set the phone down, my heart still heavy. There was more to come. The road ahead wasn't over, but for now, it felt like the world was still spinning, even though my life had come to a sudden stop. It's odd, but I feel lighter now that everything is over. I thought winning would bring relief. Instead, it gave me peace. The world felt quieter somehow, as though all the noise I had been carrying for so long had dissipated, leaving only stillness. The trial, the betrayal, the endless months of preparation, it all felt distant now. The weight of it had been lifted. And as I stood in my new apartment in Manhattan, looking out over Central Park, I realized that this was where I was supposed to be. This was my new beginning. Sometimes you don't need to scream. Sometimes silence says everything. I could still hear my father's voice in my mind, steady and calm. It wasn't the first time I had heard those words. They were his, the kind of wisdom that seemed simple, but was never fully understood until it was needed. And now, standing here in my own space, in a city that felt like both a world of opportunity and a place of quiet refuge, I understood them completely. Silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. And I had learned that through every battle, every decision I had made to confront the truth, no matter how painful. The apartment was small, but it felt infinitely more mine than the house I had grown up in. It was a clean slate. The walls were bare, except for a few pieces of art that spoke more to me than they ever could have in the house where my family's secrets had been buried for years. The light filtered in through the windows, changing with the seasons, bringing warmth during the day and a cool calm in the evenings. This was the first time I had truly felt at home in my life. I spent my first morning in the apartment with a quiet walk through Central Park. It was a crisp fall day, the air sharp but refreshing, and the trees were beginning to change color. I loved the way the leaves crunched beneath my feet, and the smell of autumn was everywhere. I sat on a bench near the fountain, watching the joggers and tourists, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The city was a living, breathing thing, but in this moment, I could almost forget it existed. It was just me, the park, and the promise of what was yet to come. I had come a long way since those early days when I first uncovered the truth about my family. The betrayal had been like a storm, and it had torn through everything I thought I knew. But now it was as if the storm had passed and the air was clear. The funds Linda and Chloe had used for their vacations, for their designer bags and extravagant lifestyle, had been siphoned from my father's estate. My father's hard-earned legacy was being used as their personal piggy bank. Linda's lawyer tried to defend her, of course. My client has been under immense emotional distress. She lost her husband, and in her grief, she made mistakes. She didn't understand the full scope of her actions. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman with a clear, steady voice, stood up to counter. Emotional distress does not absolve a person of their actions. These were premeditated acts, carried out over the span of several years. Linda Whitmore knew exactly what she was doing. Then came Chloe's turn. She sat nervously in her seat, her phone resting on the table in front of her. "I wasn't involved in any of this," she said, her voice shaking. "My mom told me what to do. She made me spend the money. I didn't know it was wrong." But her Instagram history told a different story. Mr. Kaplan had found it all. Screenshots of her posts, pictures of the designer bags, the luxury resorts. It was clear. She wasn't some naive bystander. She had been complicit in the whole thing. The room grew quiet as the jury deliberated. When they returned, the verdict was delivered swiftly. "Linda Whitmore," the judge said, his voice firm, "you are sentenced to 4 years in prison and are required to repay $157,000 in restitution." Chloe's sentence was less severe, but still significant. Chloe Whitmore, You are sentenced to 2 years of probation and are required to repay $85,000 in restitution. The room held its breath as Linda's lawyer stood, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity, but the damage had already been done. The punishment had been decided. Justice had been served. I couldn't feel triumphant. I couldn't feel anything. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My family was broken, and no amount of justice could fix it. That evening, as I sat in my car outside the courthouse, my phone buzzed. A new message from Mr. Kaplan. I opened it, reading the words that would change everything. The next step is court. It's happening faster than we thought. I set the phone down, my heart still heavy. There was more to come. The road ahead wasn't over, but for now, it felt like the world was still spinning, even though my life had come to a sudden stop. It's odd, but I feel lighter now that everything is over. I thought winning would bring relief. Instead, it gave me peace. The world felt quieter somehow, as though all the noise I had been carrying for so long had dissipated, leaving only stillness. The trial, the betrayal, the endless months of preparation, it all felt distant now. The weight of it had been lifted. And as I stood in my new apartment in Manhattan, looking out over Central Park, I realized that this was where I was supposed to be. This was my new beginning. Sometimes you don't need to scream. Sometimes silence says everything. I could still hear my father's voice in my mind, steady and calm. It wasn't the first time I had heard those words. They were his. The kind of wisdom that seemed simple but was never fully understood until it was needed. And now, standing here in my own space, in a city that felt like both a world of opportunity and a place of quiet refuge, I understood them completely. Silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. And I had learned that through every battle, every decision I had made to confront the truth, no matter how painful. The apartment was small, but it felt infinitely more mine than the house I had grown up in. It was a clean slate. The walls were bare, except for a few pieces of art that spoke more to me than they ever could have in the house where my family's secrets had been buried for years. The light filtered in through the windows, changing with the seasons, bringing warmth during the day and a cool calm in the evenings. This was the first time I had truly felt at home in my life. I spent my first morning in the apartment with a quiet walk through Central Park. It was a crisp fall day, the air sharp but refreshing, and the trees were beginning to change color. I loved the way the leaves crunched beneath my feet, and the smell of autumn was everywhere. I sat on a bench near the fountain, watching the joggers and tourists, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The city was a living, breathing thing, but in this moment I could almost forget it existed. It was just me, the park, and the promise of what was yet to come. I had come a long way since those early days when I first uncovered the truth about my family. The betrayal had been like a storm, and it had torn through everything I thought I knew. But now, it was as if the storm had passed, and the air was clear.